Wow, that's amazing. Yes, every diet does start Monday. If you're familiar with the famous Saturday Night Live skit with like Chris Farley and Adam Sandler, when I think they're eating, Chris Farley's eating somebody's fries and yells, "Lay off me, I'm starving." Goes, diet starts Monday. So
That's right.
that is true. And yeah, one of my favorite quotes from a former guest on our show said basically, if you don't think a carnivore diet is weird at first, then I think you're weird. Like it goes against everything that we're told. And so, yeah, I remember the first time I heard it was Sean Baker on Joe Rogan, and I turned it off halfway through because I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Come on.
Right.
Nuts.
How could you live without vegetables? That
Exactly.
like I really didn't think that you could live. You're gonna get
Yeah.
scurvy. What else are you gonna get?
Yeah. You're never going to poop again for
I'd
sure. You'll definitely have a heart
never.
attack. Like, yeah, of course. Um, okay. So most of my listeners probably know this, and I'm a little bit more ignorant to it. So I'm curious to know, as far as you understand it, what exactly is MS? And I also want to talk about how the rheumatoid arthritis kind of tied into this as well.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good question. So, MS is an autoimmune disease, which means your body attacks itself, which that alone, when you're diagnosed with that, that's a tough thing to wrap your brain around. My body is attacking itself. Why would I do that? So, your immune system attacks the myelin sheath, which is a coating on each nerve cell. It's like the plastic on an electrical cord that you can plug into the wall from a lamp, right? So the energy comes from the light socket and lights the lamp up. If that cord is frayed, the energy might not pass through the cord and the light may not turn on. So every single cell, billions of neurons in your brain, each one is coated with a myelin sheath. In MS, your body attacks the myelin sheath and makes it fray. So once the myelin sheath becomes totally frayed, the nerve cell will die because it needs it. And a group of nerve cells in one area will die. And then that creates a lesion that you can see on an MRI. And that just means that a group of brain cells have died and that these neural networks, so you have networks of neurons that go throughout your brain that support different behaviors, different activities. So, in other words, if you learn to ride your bike as a child, right? So that's something you never ever forget. So when you start to ride your bike, it's very difficult. You can remember your parents trying to teach you and, pedal down, pedal up, hold on the handlebars, turn right and left. There comes a point where that comes naturally and that you can do that as an adult, even, 30, 40 years later. You can do this thing and you haven't been on a bike in years and years and years. You can get on a bike and you can ride. That's because of your brain. That's because your brain formed these neural networks across the brain that support that activity. And it's like that for everything. If you learn a dance step, if you're driving in your car and you know a route to go from home to work, that is a neural network. So what happens in the MS brain when the myelin sheath frays and a group of neurons die and there's a lesion, that might interrupt a neural network. It might interrupt a neural network for standing and walking. It might interrupt one for seeing, for hearing, because everything that you do, everything that you are, starts in your brain. So, like the doctor told me when I was diagnosed, you may, have difficulty walking. You might end up with a cane. You might be in a wheelchair. You might go deaf. You might go blind. You might forget things. So that is a very scary thing. Your brain is so important to who you are. You need to keep that. So that's what happens in MS, that it's the whole neurons and the neural network and the myelin sheath. They all kind of interplay with each other to cause disease or to cause health.
Wow. That was a wonderful explanation. Thank you for doing that. Is there a typical time when this is diagnosed in somebody's life? Like, does this happen at any period? Can it happen to teenagers? Is it just people as we age? Like, when can that diagnosis happen typically?
It typically happens in the 20s.
20s.
Yeah, 20s and 30s, people start to have symptoms. I did not. I was
Okay.
diagnosed much later in life. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 50. So that is very unusual. Looking back, there were maybe a few symptoms that I experienced here and there, like 5, 10 years before, that kind of resolved themselves. And that's what's called relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. So you'll have a relapse of symptoms and then they kind of go away. So people might experience like an annoying symptom, like maybe their arm goes numb or their foot goes numb and it's numb for maybe a few weeks and then comes back and they're like, well, that was weird. That could be a start of MS. And I don't want people to get nervous if their foot is numb. There could be 100 different reasons for that, but that could happen. Or urinary incontinence is a very popular thing to happen, and then that goes away. So, um, you know, and the thing about MS, why it's so hard to diagnose, is because there are so many groups of symptoms that can happen that that are kind of random and they kind of don't go together and they're kind of weird. So, you know, I don't think the doctors want to diagnose it right away because they don't have a cure. So that's kind of the thought I got. You know, like when that first doctor said, "Well, you have a few lesions in your brain, but let's just watch it and see." It's not normal to have lesions in your brain. So, you know, that probably should have been diagnosed right away, especially where there is a certain region of the brain, like I think it's around the middle part where the lesions occur, that is indicative of multiple sclerosis. And sometimes people who have random lesions like here or there that just kind of show up, but when they're indicative of multiple sclerosis, they kind of like are more centrally located.
Got it. Okay. Again, that was very well explained. And then at what stage did the rheumatoid arthritis side of things kick in as well?
So, Casey, once you are diagnosed with one autoimmune disease, most likely you are diagnosed with a second and sometimes a third. Sometimes this happens, but you know, it's very unusual just to have one. So, this happened. It was it was a year before. So, it was 2023. And it's really funny because I have a picture of myself that I was in the hospital, and I'll tell you why. And I was looking at myself. I was on my phone. I'm like, I'm just going to take a picture and document this. So I took a picture of myself. It was March 5th, 2023. It was exactly 1 year before I started the carnivore diet. I was in the hospital. And I was in the hospital because I had a kidney stone, which I would not wish that on my worst enemy.
I've
That's
heard.
not a fun thing. And that fall, prior to that, I started getting swollen ankles, one swollen ankle. And I thought that what is going on with this one ankle? And I didn't know what was happening. I thought it was my Achilles tendon. I was going to a physical therapist. Then all of a sudden, both ankles started swelling, which the physical therapist didn't say much, but he's like, you need to get this checked out by a rheumatologist. I was like, a rheumatologist? If you have bilateral ankle swelling, wrist swelling, elbow swelling, if it's bilateral, most likely it's rheumatoid arthritis. And I didn't know that. So that was diagnosed the spring of 2023. And as this is getting diagnosed, I was given some steroids. So this is when the cure causes another problem. So I was given steroids, and from the steroids, I had swelling, not swelling, I had an ulcer in my esophagus that just got bigger and bigger and bigger. I was unable to eat. So I didn't eat hardly anything for a month, lost 20 pounds. I was very, very sick, rheumatoid arthritis, and then I get a kidney stone on top of that. So I was in the hospital for the kidney stone, but I wasn't eating, so I was on an IV, and I was very, very, very sick. So that was an incident. That was, you know, when you hear of people having sarcopenia, muscle wasting, and how that affects their life and their overall health. At the time, I was, how old was I? I was like 57, 58. So, not a spring chicken. So, you need to keep that muscle going. You need to lift weights. You need to keep yourself healthy. Lost 20 pounds. Most of it was muscle and rheumatoid arthritis, a kidney stone, and an ulcer in my esophagus. So that was like a turning point for me where I was very, very sick. And it
Wow.
took a long time to dig out of that. It took a long time to go back to the gym and to exercise when I really could even walk on a treadmill and lift weights and trying to dig out of that hole of just totally being not healthy. And that's on top of the MS, right? So this is something that I probably haven't talked about much on anyone else's podcast because there's just so much, right? It's just there's so much going on. And so this was like another layer on top of it that really contributed to me just, coming home from the hospital after 4 days in bed in the hospital and not being able to climb 3 steps to my house. I needed help with that. I needed help with that. And it shows you that it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to just weaken your body.